If you've ever been to a music festival, a beat rave, or pretty much any party in Central Europe, it's likely you've experienced, or at least heard of, MDMA. And if you have, you'll know why it's so popular. That feeling of ecstasy, of happiness, and of connection to everyone around you makes Molly an insanely popular party substance. Sadly though, this unique, euphoric, and widely enjoyed drug is one that often goes underestimated when it comes to its side effects and potential long-term harm. Thankfully though, that harm is easily reduced if you have a proper understanding of the substance and know the right precautions that need to be taken whenever you decide to indulge. So today, we're going to walk you through exactly that. Hey, it's Josh here from Mindheal. We're a non-commercial project with the objective of sharing the principles of harm reduction far and wide. In this video, we're going to take a comprehensive look at MDMA, taking a concise but comprehensive look at its effect on your brain and body, as well as walking you through proper harm reduction practices to ensure that if and when you do partake, you're properly educated and thus able to do so in the safest way possible. With that said, let's jump right into it. MDMA is one of its names, but it goes by many others. There's the actual name, which is like Molly, X, or E. It's also commonly referred to as ecstasy, but there's actually an important distinction to be made here. Ecstasy generally refers to it in its pill form, which is almost always cut with either neutral fillers or other active ingredients, such as speed or caffeine, making it more of a cocktail than a substance of its own, so it always carries unknown risks when consumed. Beyond the names though, let's get into what exactly Molly does when ingested. So let's take a peek behind the curtain and see the magic at work. Now, when it comes to the actual process through which MDMA works, there's still a degree of uncertainty. Thankfully though, that uncertainty lies in the details rather than the results, and understanding the results is far more important when it comes to harm reduction. As this is still debated though, we're going to focus on what MDMA does first, and then we'll briefly touch on how it works. So let's set the scene. You're out with the gang, and together you decide to take some Molly and ride out the night. It takes anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes to kick in. The first step is to simply let the drug do its thing. Once it reaches the brain, the show begins. You're beginning to feel the effects, but what you're feeling isn't the drug itself, as the actual MDMA molecule isn't what binds to your receptors. Rather, the amazing feeling it brings on is owed to three substances produced by your very own body: norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin. MDMA, rather than being the actual source of the sensation, is simply responsible for letting your own reserves of these three substances flow freely in vaster, greater quantities than they would otherwise. If you don't already know those three names, by the way, here's a single sentence explanation of each of them. Norepinephrine increases alertness, arousal, and attention. Dopamine provides pleasure, satisfaction, and motivation. And serotonin, most importantly, is responsible for happiness. They all achieve this by binding to receptors within the neurons in your brain, signaling for these feelings to be released. When released in tandem, in large quantities, it sends everything these molecules can provide you into overdrive. Take a second to appreciate just what that means. These are usually only released in certain scenarios, but thanks to MDMA, they're being released voluntarily. Their energy typically reserved for fight or flight scenarios, thanks to norepinephrine. The fulfillment of finally saving up enough money to buy that new car, thanks to dopamine. And the joy of falling in love, thanks to serotonin, the most important of the three. These three things, usually for wildly different scenarios, are all happening at once. This, understandably, is not something your brain is precisely prepared for, and thus carries consequences. The main effects are felt for a period between 3 and 6 hours, during which the neurons responsible for serotonin production and release are letting rip, flooding you with serotonin, as dopamine and norepinephrine follow closely behind. So, why has MDMA made them do that? Well, first, let's paint a picture. Remember those neurons that I mentioned that produce and release serotonin? Well, they are found in very close proximity to the neurons responsible for receiving this serotonin and subsequently relaying the signal. We'll refer to them as producer and receiver. The space in between the two is referred to as your synapses. When MDMA reaches the brain, it binds to these little things called uptake transmitters, which are responsible usually for scooping up free-floating serotonin molecules within your synapses that haven't closed the gap towards the receptor on the receiver neuron yet. Once it's snapped up, it's returned to the producer, where it's either recycled or broken down. However, once the MDMA has bound to it, two things happen. When MDMA enters the cell, it incites the mass release of serotonin into the synapses, bringing on the effects associated with it. And more serotonin is left free floating, which eventually reaches the receptor on the receiver cell, increasing these effects even further. Now, as this goes on, you'll be feeling all that amazing goodness that Molly is known for. But as the night goes on, that feeling will begin to fade. Typically, as people have learnt to do with other drugs, you might redose to keep the effects going. This, sadly, won't do much. One redose can work just fine if your initial dose was moderate, but you've only so much serotonin to give, and eventually the tap runs dry, no matter how much Molly you have in your system. As you come down, your body will continue to flush out serotonin in an attempt to restore balance. It does this by oxidizing serotonin with a component monoamine oxidase, or MAO for short. This compound oxidizes everything around it though, and given the exaggerated state your synapses are in at the moment, an inevitable byproduct is that dopamine becomes oxidized and enters into your producer cell by mistakenly binding to the uptake receptor mentioned earlier. Now, serotonin is broken down into a harmless molecule called 5-hyl. Dopamine, however, is broken down into hydrogen peroxide, which, as you may guess, is a big no-no in terms of substances to have floating around in your brain. This hydrogen peroxide then oxidizes the producer cell itself, causing damage, which, if frequent, can lead to long-term or even permanent dampening of serotonin production, meaning you become less sensitive to serotonin, which, as we mentioned, is responsible for making you feel happiness. Now, we enter the aftermath of an MDMA trip. Let's look at how to handle the side effects as well, so you can avoid as much as possible. The hours and days following a trip are often spent feeling low, to say the least, given that you've essentially borrowed happiness, motivation, and energy from them, and now the time has come to pay that debt. And while this is not something that can be completely avoided, there is a lot you can do to lessen the immediate after effects, as well as potential long-term ones, which ties into the most important thing that we'll be covering in this video: harm prevention. First and foremost, test your drugs. Full stop. All it takes is an unforgiving cut or an outright scam, and you can do some serious harm, or even die if you're prepared for what it can lead to. Testing kits are cheap and easily available, and can be found on our website. This simple step could be the difference between an amazing trip or an overdosed nightmare. Secondly, weigh out your doses. Sure, eyeballing usually goes fine, but it only needs to go wrong once for potentially permanent side effects. You are already tampering with some delicate neurological processes, so learn from the mistake of people who get busted with kilos of drugs in their car because they got stopped for speeding. Only take one risk at a time. In terms of harm reduction, those two principles are by far the most important, but following these next steps will only make you safer. Be in a safe environment around trusted individuals, so you're able to stay where you are and seek help if needed. Start with a low dose. Don't dive in at the deep end just because you're excited or impatient. Stay hydrated. As MDMA can and will dehydrate you pretty intensely, do not drink too much at once though, as the euphoria can make it easy to overshoot and cause blood thinning and cellular swelling, the latter of which can lead to increased pressure within your skull. Maintain solid diet and supplementation routine to ensure 5-HTP saturation, which allows for both a stronger experience and a smoother recovery. Take breaks. Around a bare minimum of 1 to 2 months, but ideally 3 to 4. And lastly, educate yourself. If you've stuck around this long, it looks like you're already well on your way with that. MDMA is a powerful thing. Between its therapeutic potential and recreational applications, it's a substance we still have much to learn from, and can prove either a tool or a gateway to experiences both breathtakingly beautiful and incredibly intense. That intensity, though, carries serious risk. If mishandled or abused, Molly can be harmful, even deadly. Proper education is key when it comes to safe use, and an overall healthy relationship with this substance, as it is with any. And thanks to the time that you've taken today to watch this video, you're that much better equipped to achieve exactly that. Now, if you found any of this useful, we'd really recommend heading over to our website for further information on how you can keep yourself safe and reduce risk factors when using MDMA, as well as reading up further about how exactly it works, and exploring the other applications being found for it. We're also introducing a new chatbot based on the hyped ChatGPT, so you can have real-time conversations about staying safe and get personalized advice on any questions or concerns that you may have. I've been Josh, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.